The hostages or Philadelphi Corridor? After the last week, that seems to be what the dilemma is for Israel. Israel, under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has now said that unfortunately it doesn't look like we can have it all. We can't also get back the hostages and prevent Hamas from rearming and reconstituting itself. These remarks were made by Netanyahu in the aftermath of the tragedy and the finding and discovery of 6 hostages in a dark tunnel in Gaza on Saturday and their identification on Sunday. The country is wounded. The country is crying and in mourning because these people were alive just days before. Carmel, Ori, Hirsch, Sagi, Alex. They were, and Aden, they were alive, and Israel failed them. And the question now is, how do we go forward? Is it still possible to get back the rest of the hostages, about 100 who remain in Gaza, who are alive, who are dead? We don't exactly know. But the prime minister has finally said that his priority is preventing Hamas from rearming, and that means staying in what's known as the Philadelphi Corridor. So to break this all down, I brought on today's episode 2 of my JPPI colleagues, Professor Michal Siegel and Shmuel Rosner, who just did a great poll looking at what do Israelis think when it comes to the issue and this dilemma of should we prioritize the hostages or the Philadelphia Corridor. Here we go. Michal and Shmuel, thank you very much for joining me. Always great to have both of you back on the podcast. So, Shmuel, I want to start with you because you just did a great, very interesting poll for JPPI, looking at what the Israeli sentiment is regarding this whole debate that we've really been living with for a long time, but has really come to the fore over the last week. What does Israel prefer? We know what the government now has decided that it's prioritizing, but what does the average Israeli prefer? A deal that brings back the hostages or the continued Israeli presence in the Philadelphia Corridor? So what did we find?
Well, first of all, we must say that vast majority of Israelis would like to have both. They'd want to have the hostages back and to keep Israel's security as safe as possible. So if we give them such option, they'll just choose both. The question that we presented to Israelis was a question of if you must choose one of these two options, either you choose the hostage deal or the Philadelphia Corridor, what would you do? And the results are that Israelis are indeed split. There is a huge difference between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs on this topic. When it comes to the Arabs, 80-something% of them would take the deal over the Philadelphia Corridor. However, when you look at the 80% Jewish Israelis, in our poll, it was 49-43 for Philadelphia. In some other polls, we must say the results were slightly different for slightly different variations of questions. But by and large, what you see here is a population that is split, depends on the question, either somewhat more favorable to the Philadelphia Corridor or to a hostage deal. It's an ongoing thing. And, one more caveat is that this whole presentation of the dilemma as if it's either this or that is something that was initiated by the prime minister. The prime minister wanted the public to think that it's either this or that, and hence present us with this stark choice.
Right.
One could say, well, why insist on Philadelphia, or why does it have to be this or that? Maybe we have a way to combine both of them.
I think that's an interesting point, because Netanyahu has turned this into a zero-sum game, right? It's either you get one or you get the other. On the other hand, I have to say that personally, and Michal, I want to hear your thoughts here for a moment, but personally, I didn't like his decision, right? In his announcement on Monday when he spoke to the Israeli public. And by the way, just for our viewers and listeners, the fact that Netanyahu gave that hour-long press conference on Monday evening and then on Wednesday evening spoke to the foreign press in Israel. that is a result of pressure that he feels, right? Otherwise, he would not be talking and explaining himself. But I did feel to some extent a bit, I don't want to call it relief, but I was kind of happy to see that finally he is saying it is an either or, because for the last almost 11 months, he's thrown sand in our eyes and told us complete victory. And we're going to eliminate Hamas and we're going to get back the hostages. And I think some of us knew that no, it wasn't all going to happen, because this was a pipe dream that he was selling to the Israeli people. And now, at least finally, he's coming out and saying openly, no, I can't deliver everything, and I've decided to prioritize the Philadelphia corridor. So, Michal, how do you see what he did?
So I agree. I think the fact that he's finally telling us we can't have it all is a shift from what he was saying before. But it was a smart shift, because doing it this way led to the decision when you have to decide either or. I think, a few months ago, the result that Shmuel got, he wouldn't have gotten. The fact that so many Israelis, first of all, let's talk about Philadelphia, that Israeli only, entered in March. You can do an NLP search of how many times the word Philadelphia appears before that, and when does it start appearing as a thing. We have the military and security expert explaining that it's not, what happened.
By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, Michal, but you made a good point. The website Kippah, which is a right-wing religious website, did a look. How many times has Netanyahu over the last decade tweeted about the Philadelphia corridor? And you know what the answer is? Twice. And you know when he's tweeted about it twice in the last decade? In the past week. So for 9 years and 11 months, pretty much, the guy never mentioned the Philadelphia corridor. But sorry, go back to you.
No, but I'm saying everything. So the way it's done, when you lead the people to then make a choice between either or, it took a while to convince us that this is an actual dilemma. By the way, opposed to what the Minister of Security says, the security minister, the army, this is what we were told, that this opinion presented by Bibi as such might not be the case. So the fact that for a long time he said we can have it all, but then now he says you have to choose, and then the choice, as Shmuel presented to us in his polling, which I still hope might have been a little bit skewed, but that many people still choose to, if they have to choose not to go for the hostages. For me, it's heartbreaking. Honestly, it's heartbreaking, because I keep saying, not only does I'm not sure that this is the right choice that we have to make. Is it really that choice? Is it hostages or Philadelphia? But even given that this is it, the fact that so many choose to give up on the hostages, having grown up with Zecharia Baumel's, stickers everywhere, and having a consensus. By the way, talking to American Jewry, the hostages used to be a consensus. We fend for people, and these are some of them young people who were kidnapped from, next to their murdered friend from a music festival, people taken from their home in their pajamas. And the state of Israel says, well, no, there's bigger things ahead. And it has to remind all of us, when Putin, in that incident in that theater, that decided, shoot hostages alongside the murderers, because, and everyone, 125, I don't remember the numbers, were killed, and it was still, celebrated as a victory. Or where he had the submarine, I don't know if you guys remember that, the submarine went down and there were a few people still alive, and he refused to acknowledge that he needs help and let them die.
Right.
The fact that, human life is not high on the priority of a country. We make that choice every day by sending our kids to the army. We can make that choice. But in these cases, bringing it to that extreme, that's new. That's new. And honestly, for me, heartbreaking.
So Shmuel, how do you explain it then? Where does it come from? This real division, on the one hand, I was thinking about it today, and it was something that I feel to an extent we've seen play out a lot throughout this war, is the battle between the Israeli heart and the Israeli mind. The Israeli heart, and I even would say about Netanyahu, I have a lot of criticism of him. I think that this is a cynical game. I think he is, getting caught up on the Philadelphi corridor, not necessarily for the right reasons, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think a lot throughout this war, like Michal spoke about, really from the heart, Israelis in their hearts want the hostages. Even Netanyahu wants the hostages back, no question, right?
There's
But
no
the
doubt.
brain, the Israeli brain, is worried about what's going to happen in the future. So how do you explain this real split between the Israeli people on this issue?
When we think about the Philadelphia Corridor, I think that we need to think about it not as the actual Philadelphia Corridor, which is a highly technical point, whether Israel needs to have boots on the ground on certain areas to prevent smuggling from Egypt into Gaza of different weaponry, etc. That's a question for professionals. When Netanyahu says Philadelphia Corridor, he uses it as a symbol for security. The choice is not between the hostages and the Philadelphia Corridor. It's between having the hostages back and long-term security for Israel. And I think that for many Israelis, the circumstances indeed, they feel that they forced a slight change of priorities. If 10 years ago or 15 years ago, we could prioritize the lives of hostages, even 1 or 2 or 3 hostages over security interests, many Israelis feel that October 7th forced on them a change of priorities, and they will now say, well, it's a devastating thought to realize that these 100 and something hostages are still there. However, Israel is destined to fight the war. Well, using the language of General Benny Gantz, he said the war is going to last 1 year, a decade, and a generation. That was his term. So if we are going to fight this war for a whole generation, then we have to think about the 100 hostages among the many other victims of the ongoing war that will be lasting for the next decade or generation. So the whole math of what you do and why you do it changes. It's not saving lives versus keeping a corridor. It's saving lives now versus saving possibly even more lives later. That's the choice that Israelis are trying to make. And again, it's a very difficult decision. I must say that had I, writing a poll is easy for me. Answering such poll would be very difficult for me. I'd probably say, I don't know. I don't know what's the right answer. It's a difficult dilemma, and to minimize it and make it all about cynical political calculations, I think is a simplification that I would not recommend in Israel's current situation.
Okay, but I do have to push.
Michal
I'm going
to
to give you a moment because I know you have what you're going to say, but I'm also going to push back for a moment, Shmuel, and then I'm going to have Michal push back even more, and we'll give you a chance to respond. Netanyahu, the Philadelphia Corridor, right? Specifically, let's just talk about that for a moment. And just for our viewers and listeners who might not be as familiar as we are, 14-kilometer strip of land between Gaza and Egypt. Hamas has had tunnels there for the last 25 years, if not longer, since the beginning of tunnels. Israel has been there in the past up until 2005, when under the disengagement plan, Israel pulled out of the entire Gaza, including the Philadelphia Corridor. Benjamin Netanyahu himself voted 3 times in favor of the Gaza Strip disengagement, contrary to what he likes to often portray himself. He's said publicly, I was the head of the opposition during the disengagement. That is completely false. It's a fabrication. He voted in the Knesset twice. He voted once around the government table. He resigned from the cabinet of Ariel Sharon as finance minister 10 days or 8 days before the disengagement was implemented, and turned himself into the opposition. Not true. He was a full partner to the plan. Put that aside. Philadelphia Corridor. Netanyahu as prime minister for the last 16 years, minus 1 year between 21 and 22, oversaw 3 large-scale operations in the Gaza Strip, in addition to some smaller ones. Operation Pillar of Defense 2012, Protective Edge 2014, Guardian of the Walls 2021. Only in one of the three did he send ground troops into Gaza. In none of the three did he ever send anyone to the Philadelphi Corridor. So for 16 years, the man never cared about the Philadelphia Corridor. And now suddenly, when we have hostages who are within arm's reach and we can potentially bring them home, and yes, pay a painful price, suddenly it's all about the Philadelphia Corridor. So Michal, it's politics, no?
Not only is it politics, I could have, by the way, Shmuel, I listened to you and I say, you know what, you're right. It's not a simplistic one. And I have to say, it took me a while to start protesting in the street. When the war started, I have to say, I kept saying, I don't know how to make that decision. I didn't know where to go when people were saying it. It's truly complex. And I listened to you and I say, it is true, but how can you, having known Netanyahu and his agenda and his lies and his calculation, how can you even say that we can't, in an ideal theoretical world, you're right. It is a complex subject. And I have to say, people listening to that, and I know some of my best friends are debating in it, and the military and security concern, by the way, which already started with Gilad Shalit. The question, did we make the right decision in Iskat Gilad Shalit? That's a valid question. And by the way, having come from the left, I do not mock the people who claim that this was a mistake because of the security risk that we took. I am with you on that one, but up to a point, when you look at Bibi and you look at the situation now, where we were a few months ago, where we are now, where does this staying in Gaza lead to? What's the prospect and what's the price we're paying now, today? These were hostages that were alive until a few days ago. This is not something, saying you don't make it into a simplistic thing. It is when you're looking at Bibi. Honestly, when you have what we know of him as a leader, and he's the one telling us that that's the dilemma. Sorry, I'd rather not make that dilemma when I see the price in my face and I see the families in their face. And I want to say one more thing. Security is right, and long-term security is right, but we see families of people who have their loved one well and alive, and there's a chance to save them. There's an ethos, and we cannot, seriously, it's not that I'm jumping to Putin. There was always something that we say something cruel and what's the difference between sending your son to the army and, knowing that there's a chance he's gonna die? It's different because they're alive now when we can save them. That's the way it is. We send soldiers to heroic battles to take hostages out, and they might die doing it because this is the ethos. This is Israeli ethos, and losing it leads to people. I remember coming from the States in the middle of the war, coming back from sabbatical, and I was in a protest, and I saw right-wing people yelling at family as hostages, and I felt my heart break for the first time in a way that never before, because I felt this is a different Israel than the one that I was raised in. This kind of calculation leads to a break in Israeli ethos and Jewish ethos in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before. And Shmuel, complicated, not complicated, there's someone leading us there with a mind calculated to do that. And he's doing it for all of the wrong reasons, with lack of empathy towards those families, the cruelty in which he talks to them, the way you see his calculation being done. I'm sorry. Yes, it is simplistic. Yes, it's not complicated. Now, with these cards that are laid on the table, not complicated.
So Shmuel, we don't want to turn you. I know that you're not Netanyahu's spokesperson.
That's fine. What you're saying?
No, I know that you're not a spokesperson. I know that you also don't agree with everything that he's doing. But for the purpose of this conversation, you're representing him. So what's the response to what Michal just said?
So the response of people who still, who are undecided about this, or even decided that they oppose the deal as it is currently presented, their response to your arguments will be, well, okay, so you don't trust the prime minister. We understand that, but this is not about him. This is about Israel's long-term security. So rather than looking at the prime minister and his motivation, a prime minister have the wrong motivation and still the right answer, or he can have the right motivation and still the wrong answer. So I will take Netanyahu out of the equation, and I will also take all of the things that you mentioned, Yaakov, what he said before and after with the withdrawal from Gaza, and what he did in the last 16 years. Let's say he was wrong all the way. Okay, he was wrong before disengagement. He was wrong after disengagement. He was wrong for 16 years. Does this mean that he's wrong now? Not necessarily. The situation changed on October 7th, and that's something we have to take into account. There are certain things that Israel did in the past and can no longer do today. Israel gave, for 16 years, Netanyahu gave Hamas billions of dollars.
Yeah.
In the hope that this will keep them somewhat quiet, under wraps. He was mistaken to do such thing all throughout his term as prime minister. It was miscalculation. It was misunderstanding of Hamas. It was strategically detrimental to Israel.
But I got to say, 1 second, Shmuel, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what you're saying, and I understand that, right? People are allowed to make mistakes and they're allowed to change. But when mistakes of this caliber and this scope, and just to say, well, now we've changed. Well, no, there's also something called accountability. And you were responsible for what happened here. And it's not just now suddenly waking up to the threat. It's also because you knew about it then and you chose a failed policy. So I also think that by accepting this reality now, what we're also we're allowing to happen as a people is we're allowing for people to just not care, because there's no price for them to pay for these tragic mistakes that they make.
Yeah, but what you're saying now is true, and it refers to a different question, whether the prime minister should remain in office. And my answer on this one is simple and clear. No, he should have gone. He should have resigned many months ago. He should not be the person making the decisions because someone like Michal cannot trust him, and because I cannot trust him, and because of his many past mistakes. However, when we go back to the question of the Philadelphi Corridor, it doesn't help us at all that he's still there. We cannot correct the mistake of him staying by making a different mistake on security matters. Now, again, I'm in many ways undecided on the question of the Philadelphi Corridor. I understand that Israel is right to demand that Hamas will no longer be the ruler of Gaza. I understand that Israel must take all the necessary measures to prevent Hamas from rearming itself. And if the only way to do this is to keep the Philadelphia Corridor, maybe that's a price that Israel must pay. I don't know. Again, that's a technical question for people who are experts on security affairs. What I cannot accept is the saying that, okay, because we dislike Bibi, or we don't trust him, or because he was supposed to go and he's still there, we are going to remedy that problem by making another problem. That's not the right answer as far as I'm concerned.
Michal, this, you kind of mentioned this before, but there's a painful price, and that's also the hostages. And a lot of people look at Israel now and say, how is it even possible that after these 6 people, the 6 hostages, and the ones, some of them like Hirsch, Goldberg, Poland, or Carmel Gat, were real icons for Israelis and for lots of people around the world. They were alive and they were murdered just a day or two before the IDF found them in that tunnel somewhere in the Gaza Strip. And how is it that that's still not enough to get Israelis to take to the streets? And you mentioned how you yourself, it took you some time to protest. What more does need to happen, do you think, for Israelis to really recognize that this has to change?
I don't know. I have to tell you, On Sunday, we went to Tel Aviv, and it was the first time in my life that I couldn't breathe being out, and I couldn't breathe. There were so many people around me, there was no air to breathe. And it felt exhilarating. You know, we were there for 4 hours. We went to Ayalon to block the street, and there were hundreds of people on with us on the actual, you know, street. And we came home, and there, you know, there was a strike, and you woke up the next morning, and nothing changed. And it might have to do with the fact that the people who protested next to me looked alike. They looked like Tel Aviv people, even though we were more than 500,000 people on the street that day. I think this is what gets me very, very sad. I think we're tired of protesting for the next, you know, hour and a half. There's a sense of despair that nothing matters. So, you know, we haven't been able to change anything by protesting in the street. So what brings us from the street to election? How does that, what's the link between that? So maybe it's not that. I thought that the strike would help, and I was completely wrong. And so I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think the only way to change this government is the way the previous government managed, you know, the opposition in the previous government managed to change the government, is by convincing a few good people to, you know, to vote for election. And the fact that this hasn't happened, that means our entire situation is dependent on 4 or 5 people within the government. That's it. And the current government has been very, very good about choosing certain people that won't do that no matter what, because everything depends on that. And I'm not, you know, I don't have an answer to you. And the reason that it makes me extremely sad is because we as a family, we made the choice of come back to Israel and live here. But I have a lot of friends from the academia and from the medical profession who make, and the, you know, business world, will make a different decision these days. Even if there will be election, and we might be able to change it, and maybe the war will end, and maybe will it be too late? I don't know, and I'm feeling very sad and depressed about the prospects with you.
Well, on that not optimistic note,
you should ask Shmuel another question. He might give you a more optimistic.
No, I mean, by the way, I'll just maybe just say myself, you know, there are serious questions here, right? And I think Shmuel kind of touched upon this before, but someone asked me recently, you know, what is, I don't know why they were asking me, what does halakha say? Should return hostages or not? I'm like, I'm the farthest thing from a rabbi, but I said, put aside halakha for a moment. Look at Israeli society. Do we have to keep ourselves safe? Yes. Does that mean maybe staying in Philadelphia? Yes. But there's 2 other elements you have to keep in mind. One is we have kids that need to continue to serve and go to the army. We have parents that need to continue to allow their kids to go serve in the army. If they feel that the army and the country doesn't do what it takes to bring back their people, then why would these people go put their lives on the line? 1. And 2 is, how do we heal as a society? We are all wounded and scarred since October 7th. And the only real way that there will be a national healing for the people of Israel, and probably for the Jewish world in entirety, is for the hostages to come home. So when you talk about a vague threat one day from a tunnel that will be dug or won't be dug.
Let me add, Yaakov, I'll stop you and add one more thing, because we don't speak enough about that. We're also killing a lot of innocent people while being in Gaza, and we have to take responsibility for that too. The war continues, and the state of Israel is responsible for the death of a lot of innocent people. Now, it might be worth it. The damages, the damage that occurred as a result of the security of Israel is something that's worth considering ethically. But the results, the bottom line is that we are killing a lot of innocent people alongside, you know, hostages, and that has to be taken. You're asking me, I'm a Talmud professor. That also has to be taken into consideration. Being the Jewish people, being a moral country, that has to be taken into consideration as well. What does it do to us when we are responsible for the death of so many innocent lives, of kids, of children, of people in Gaza?
I was trying to end with like a more, a better note,
Sorry.
but look at where you take us once again,
That's
Michal.
the upbeat
Sorry.
ending that she had to offer.
Exactly. I mean, come on. We were
That's
trying.
Michal. That's Michal at her utmost upbeat.
That's Michal
midday.
the optimist. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank we both, Michal and Shmuel. Thank you for joining me, and to our viewers and listeners, thank you very much for being with us. Have a Shabbat Shalom, a good weekend. We always, as usual, pray and hope for good news, and we'll see you back here next week on Monday and Thursday.